This is Kim Ha-ro. Born in 1928 as a child of Korean immigrants, 18 years after Japan formally annexed Korea, a colonial occupation that lasted until the end of World War II, in 1948, he lived in the Japanese Empire, growing up in a poor family. His father, Kwon Maying-sul, was killed in an accident during construction work in 1931. His mother remarried in 1933. At that time, his family name changed from Kwon to Kim. Early on in his childhood, he dropped out of elementary school after experiencing endless teasing by his classmates, being called names like dirty and barbarian. After an unstable life of dead-end jobs and recidivist crimes, he read voraciously from Greek philosophy to economics. At one point, he was caught for theft and was put into the reformatory in 1943. After that, he committed crimes including theft, swindling, and burglary, resulting in prison terms. All of this leads up to what's called the Kim Ha-ro incident. What I'm about to read you was published in the English-language newspaper Junang Daily. On February 20th, 1968, gunshots were fired at a club in Shimizu, in Shizuoka Prefecture, Japan. The incident resulted in the deaths of a Yakuza boss and a group member. The suspect, Kim Ha-ro, 41, was a second-generation Korean in Japan. The Yakuza threatened him over money he had borrowed, and when they insulted his ethnicity, he snapped. The incident appeared to have been motivated by a combination of discrimination, violence, and the unfair treatment from the police he had put up with his whole life. Armed with a gun and explosives, he dodged the police and hid at Fujimiya Ryokan in Suma Takayo, just 45 kilometers away from the crime scene, where he took the owners and its guests hostage for 88 hours, called in reporters for interviews, and conducted a live phone interview. News teams sent helicopters to broadcast the hostage situation in real time. Kim claimed his actions were intended to denounce discrimination against the Korean people in Japan and demanded an apology from the police. In the end, Shizuoka Prefecture's police chief publicly apologized, and the hostage situation came to an end as cops, posed as reporters, made their way inside and arrested Kim. He was sentenced to life in prison and released on parole in 1999 after serving 31 years. Afterward, he moved to Busan, where he died in 2010, at the age of 81. You may wonder why Kim Ha-ro was so disillusioned with Japanese society to the point where he committed an act of terrorism. That's because he was born a Zainichi, a term used to describe ethnic Koreans in Japan. Technically, Zainichi means residing in Japan and can refer to non-Koreans, but the term has become synonymous with the ethnic Korean population in Japan. Which is interesting, because most of the Zainichi population are very much Japanese, with a lot of them being descendants of those who were forced to migrate to Japan during its colonial occupation of Korea. Most of them grew up in Japan, have been living in Japan for generations, speak Japanese fluently or as their native language, and sometimes more culturally Japanese than Korean. Despite that, they still couldn't be both Japanese and Korean at the same time, because unlike Canada and the United States, where you can be Korean American and or Japanese American, in Japan, nationality is tied to ethnicity, meaning that in order to be naturalized as a Japanese citizen, you would have to renounce citizenship and allegiance to your country of origin, and retaining Korean nationality was the only legitimate way to be Zainichi in the legal sense. To put it simply, the word serves as a constant reminder that they are not ethnic Japanese, reinforcing a binary distinction between Japanese and non-Japanese. Identity is complicated. Everything we've talked about thus far illustrates that. Identity is influenced by a variety of factors, mainly the environments you find yourself in over the course of your life. Zainichi Koreans find themselves in many environments where they have to switch between two identities. What do I mean by this? Well, Zainichi Koreans have two names. This name, which is the real name, and this name, which is the Japanese alias. Zainichi Koreans tend to use this name in everyday life to avoid being discriminated against. Mirei Park from the Yakuza series is an interesting case. A Japanese character who is of Korean descent, but is also an orphan, which makes her cultural origins a bit more confusing. It can only be assumed that she found herself in a multitude of environments affecting how she identifies. Was she given this name by her adoptive parents? Was she given this name by her birth parents? Was one of her parents Korean, and were they the adoptive or biological parent? Yakuza 5, the game she is introduced in, doesn't make it very clear, but what is clear is that the Korean part of her identity largely influenced how she was treated throughout her life. She was abused by those that took care of her. To add on to that out-of-place feeling that she had growing up, she was left-handed, but her adoptive parents forced her to write with her right hand. During her childhood, she came to admire idols and the way that they were loved and respected, and decided that her goal would be to become an idol, to feel the love that she never got growing up. As an idol, she debuted at age 18, but there were a couple of things that she needed to keep secret in order for her career to survive. Of course, this included her Korean ancestry. Revealing this part of her identity would have made her subject to a level of scrutiny unimaginable. She had something else to hide too. That something else was the fact that she was married to Goro Majima. Keep in mind, she was 18 at the time, and this was in the 90s. So at that time, Majima would have been in his mid-20s, probably somewhere between 25 and 28. That's a pretty big age gap between these two. But she is 18, so that did make her an adult. Anyway, weird age gaps aside, she also had to keep this marriage secret for obvious reasons. On her debut day, Majima gave her a very expensive fountain pen that she kept as a good luck charm, hiding it behind her mic during her debut, a pen that she keeps for a very long time. During the very short year that the two were married, Park learned that she was pregnant with Majima's child and got an abortion immediately before telling him about it, believing it was necessary for her career. One thing I find interesting about the scene that she tells her backstory in is the fact that when she mentions that she got pregnant, we get a close-up shot of her mouth, and the music stops, which I assumed emphasizes just how serious and taboo what she just mentioned is, those being abortions and teenage pregnancies. This scene low-key feels like a horror movie with how tense the atmosphere gets after this reveal. I don't know how taboo these topics are in Japan, but I'd imagine that you probably shouldn't talk about something like this in public with someone you don't know. Or with someone you do know. Anyhow, Majima, feeling betrayed by Park, physically assaults her by hitting her. This does irreparable damage to their relationship, effectively destroying their marriage. Majima, believing he was doing Park more harm than good by staying in Sotenbori, leaves for Kamurocho. Park, soon after this, learns that she had become infertile. All of these secrets eventually reach her agency, causing them to cancel her dream concert at the Tokyo Dome. Her career as an idol is effectively finished after this cancellation, and she retires. Eventually, she starts her own talent agency called Dyna Chair, in the hopes of living out her failed dream vicariously through the girls that she manages. We all have dreams. We all aspire to do something, but so many factors can be obstructive in our pursuit to achieve our dreams. And that's very evident through both Park and Kim's stories. Both Zainichi Korean, both facing a whole lot of controversy, albeit one being more violent and realistic than the other. Park's Korean ancestry is only really referenced once, but it would clearly be a very huge factor in influencing the course of her life, as we've seen with the examples of how hard it is to be a Zainichi Korean in Japan. It is definitely one of the biggest factors that influenced her downfall as an idol. So we know that she didn't want the same thing to happen to the girls that she signed to her own talent agency, because she wanted to live vicariously through them, right? Well, the ultimate candidate to fulfill her dream is Haruka Sawamura. So let's talk about Haruka. Haruka Sawamura is also an orphan. Her mother died in the first Yakuza game, putting her in the care of Kazuma Kiryu. For all of her formative years, Kiryu had been her sole caretaker. Adoptive father, if you want to get technical. Which means that Haruka never got to have a maternal figure in her childhood and adolescence. And all love to single fathers out there, but there are certain aspects of girlhood that only a mother could understand. It's the reason why Haruka always had to do her makeup on her own, until this scene with her and Park.
化粧は女の身だしなみ。ブスだってメイクで可愛くなるの。あなたがうまく化粧できるようになれば、もっともっと綺麗になれるのよ。服だってもっとおしゃれなのを選ばなきゃ。今の自分で十分可愛いなんて思ってたらダメ。
可愛いなんて思ってません。
思ってなかったら少しでもマシになろうと一生懸命お化粧するはずなの。見た目を少しでも良くしようと努力するものよ。この世界に入った以上はもっと美に貪欲になりなさい。何かおかしい？
嬉しいんです。
怒られたことが？
こんな風にお化粧してもらえることなんてないと思ってたから、すごく嬉しいんです。
This scene alone perfectly communicates all the feelings Haruka has felt because of not having a maternal figure, and it's done pretty subtly. It's one of those moments that demonstrates that Yakuza 5 does have masterful writing. If only it were more consistent. Anyway, Haruka never mentions her dead mom in this scene. Not once. So even if Yakuza 5 is the first Yakuza game you've ever played, this scene alone will still be able to tell you about the most important detail about Haruka's backstory, without her having to spell it out to the audience. And as soon as we get to the next scene, Park spells it out to the audience. But hey,
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
Writers who use subtext are cowards, right? By the end of this chapter, it's clear to the audience that Haruka has developed a connection to Park. She buys her a gift, they go shopping together, they play arcade games together, and they hold hands after seeing a mother and her child. Wait a minute. Why is Park the most hated Yakuza character again? Her backstory is very sad, and that could make the audience feel sympathetic. She's very nice to Haruka, recognizing that she never had a mother figure, and thus fulfills that role for Haruka. So why do people hate her again? Okay, so remember all that stuff that I told you about Zainichi Koreans? Well, if it wasn't obvious, absolutely none of that was in the actual game. You see, RGG doesn't follow the essential rule of writing. Show, don't tell. Everything we hear about Park's backstory is told only through a dialogue scene where Park is talking to Haruka while the taxi drives them home. The only visual representation we get to see of Park's past is a photo of her, Majima, and Katsuya. So it's very hard for the audience to feel empathy for a character whose struggles we don't even see depicted on screen. But believe it or not, that is not the main reason why Yakuza fans hate Park. Oh no, that's definitely not the case, and I'll tell you why. Ever heard of Tiger Moms? Definition time! Tiger Moms. A strict or demanding mother who pushes her child or children to high levels of achievement, especially by using methods regarded as typical of parenting in China and other parts of East Asia. So Park very much acts like a tiger mom to Haruka. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is why she treats Haruka like this. And the answer to that question would be, because she's selfish as fuck. If you think back to that scene in the prologue of Haruka's part of the story, where Park is trying to convince Kiryu to give his guardianship of Haruka to her, You may remember that she basically guilt trips and manipulates Kiryu into giving up Haruka to her agency. And one thing I want to focus on is this specific line from Park. You can't even make one little girl's wishes come true? You realize that, yes? This line right here illustrates to us that Park isn't speaking from Haruka's perspective. The little girl she is talking about is her younger self. And that right there tells us why she manipulates and guilt trips Kiryu in such a shameless manner. It's coming from a very selfish and desperate point of view. A point of view that yearns to have her ultimate dream achieved because she never got the chance due to circumstances and society's biases. I mean, heck, she even plans Haruka's Tokyo debut before she even gets the confirmation from Kiryu that she can take her under her sleeve. She's extremely desperate, and we see that in her attempt at manipulation.
彼女を守るためなの。あなたと一緒にいた過去を消し去ることができれば、私は彼女を守れる。だから。
もういい。話は分かった。
返事は？
俺はここから離れるつもりはない。朝顔の子供たちにとって、俺がいなくなることは幸せなことじゃない。俺は必要とされる限りここで生きていくつもりだ。
それがあなたの仕事だと？
仕事とかそんな軽いもんじゃない。それが俺の生きる道だということだ。用事があるんで失礼する。勝手に帰ってくれ。
何にも分かってないのね。道を極めたっていう割にはずいぶん世間知らずなのね、あなた。女の子一人に夢を見させることすらできない男がかっこつけてんじゃないわよ。彼女だけじゃない。先日ここを訪れた時分かったわ。朝顔に夢はない。あなたがいる限りずっとね。
どういう意味だ？
私が幸せと聞いたら子供たちは皆口を揃えて言ったわ。幸せだって。確かに身寄りのない子供たちにとってここは最高の場所かもしれない。でもね、あの子たちは全員怯えている。
何にだ？
今だけの幸せが壊れてしまうことに。あの子たちは全員心からあなたを愛してる。でもあなたといることの幸せを守ろうとするがあまり、全てのものを犠牲にしても構わないとすら考えてる。例えば夢。子供っていうのはもっとわがままで、もっと無鉄砲で、もっと自分に忠実であるべきよ。あなたが近くにいるとあの子たちは自分自身の夢を描けない。
夢？
あなたにもわかるでしょ？子供たちがいずれ大きくなるためには夢ってものが大切になるんだってことぐらい。そういった幸せを維持しようとする人間と何も持ってなくても夢を追いかける人間、どっちが強くてたくましいか。旅をさせなさい。そしてあなたも旅に出て、人のためじゃなくて自分のために探すの。必死になれる夢を。
だが
彼女を私に預けてくれれば、その代償に子供たちの夢への保証をするつもりよ。施設の子全員が成人するまでの養育費、その他才能への投資、すべて私が面倒を見させてもらう。 あなたは自分の代わりとなるスタッフを探して。安心して。はるかちゃんは絶対に成功する。歌手という道はあの子にとってかけがえのない夢になるわ。
私の夢。
どうしてそう言い切れるんだ？本当にそれがはるかの夢かどうなのか、なぜあんたにわかる？
簡単よ。私の夢も同じだからよ。
あんたの夢。
そう。夢は必ず受け継がれていく。人から人へ。必ずね。
Yeah, I don't think Park knows what a family is or what a family is supposed to do, because if she did, she would know that you can pursue your own dreams and aspirations without sacrificing the relationships you have with your family members. If anything, your family will support you in your pursuits. Because that's what people in relationships do for each other, especially in familial relationships. Families aren't burdens. So the conclusion that we can come to is that Park is very bad at manipulation, but since Kiryu was a dumbass, he is still convinced by what Park has said to him. If Kiryu wasn't so guilt-ridden because of his ties to the Yakuza, he would have repeated his request, telling Park to get the fuck out of his house. But he's a dumbass, so sadly that doesn't happen. So, trying to live out your dream vicariously through someone else by making them achieve the things that you never got the chance to achieve is wrong. Like, super duper wrong, especially if they aren't a willing participant. On top of that, she threatens to stop supporting the Morning Glory orphanage in Okinawa financially if Haruka doesn't perform well in her debut concert. There's no room for failure, she says with a glare on her face. And Haruka isn't the only character who has to bear the brunt of Park's behavior. She doesn't treat the workers in the lower ranks of her company very well, giving unreasonable expectations for Ogita, Haruka's dance instructor at the time, treating the absolute sweetheart that is Hori-san like shit. She was not a very good boss, and if you've ever had a terrible boss, you're probably familiar with the fact that that experience is absolutely excruciating. Comment down below about what your experience was like if you've ever had a terrible boss. Mirei Park is not a good person. By almost every metric. She's extremely selfish, manipulative, obnoxious, and just downright mean. But at the same time, her backstory provides an understandable explanation for as to why she was the way she was. She grew up a Zainichi Korean in Japan, and the Kim Hae-ro story tells a lot about what that experience is like, and how hard it is to grow up in post-colonial Japan as a half-Korean person. On top of that, she was an orphan and got pregnant at 18, with that shattering her dreams. But her backstory and what she suffered through does not justify the things she ultimately did. What she needed was therapy, not living vicariously through someone else, because such a prospect can often result in abuse and manipulation. I mean, she literally separated a daughter and her adoptive father. And that's not something Yakuza 5 seems to remember after she dies. Yeah, she's dead and she never got to live out her dream, but that doesn't change the fact that she forced Haruka into this life. If anything, the fact that she supposedly knew she was gonna die and planned out everything for the Tokyo Dome concert before she even signed Haruka makes her selfishness and her actions all the more objectionable. What it means is that she knew her death would guilt trip her. All of this proves that Park is easily the most selfish Yakuza character, and honestly one of the most selfish characters in gaming, period. Some may say that her character is morally gray because of her backstory, but I beg to differ. RGG really wants you to feel sympathetic and empathetic to Park, even painting her actions as ultimately justified. But her actions cannot be justified. It wasn't Haruka's dream to be an idol. It was Park's dream, and she forced Haruka to live out her dream in an extremely predatory and exploitative industry. Speaking of that, what was Haruka's actual dream? Did Haruka ever actually have aspirations?